Halls of Lightning is one of 2 dungeons found in the north of Storm Peaks, just outside Ulduar. The first boss you'll encounter is General Jarn Grim, probably pronouncing that wrong. His first ability is Charge Up, which, whilst the general is out of combat, he'll periodically charge himself and all allies within 25 yards with lightning. Whilst under the effect, him and his allies will gain a 30% size and damage buff. It will stay under the effect of this buff until he rotates back to the same point he cast the Charge Up effect. He's got 3 stances, just like a warrior. So in battle stance, he's got Mortal Strike, which hits the highest threat target with physical damage and reducing the effectiveness of healing by 25%. He's got a Slam, which hits the highest threat target with physical damage. He's got a Pummel, which will do physical damage and interrupt someone casting close to the boss. And finally, a Battle Aura, which whilst in battle stance, it increases his and his allies' attack speed by 25%. He's then got Berserker stance, where he's got a Whirlwind, which, as you would expect, attacks all players within 8 yards of the boss. He's got a Cleave, which inflicts damage to the highest threat target and his nearest allies, affecting up to 3 targets. And he's got an Intercept, which charges a random player and stuns him for 3 seconds. He's also got a Berserker Aura, which whilst in Berserker stance increases his and his allies' damage by 25%. When he's in defensive stance, he's got Iron Form, which causes him to become immune to bleed, poison and disease effects, and in addition increases his armor by 20% for 8 seconds. He's got a Knock Away, which knocks all targets within 10 yards away and deals physical damage, a Spell Reflect, which reflects the next spell back at the target that cast it, and finally Defensive Aura, which whilst in defensive stance decreases his and his allies' damage taken by 25%. He also has Stromborn Lieutenants with him, which have got Arc Weld, which welds a player to the ground, inflicting nature damage whilst moving for 10 seconds. And a Renew Still, which is interruptible by the way, and channels a heal into the general, healing every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Tactics-wise, the boss is a very traditional warrior, sharing many of the same skills. If your group is not aiming for the achievement, pulling the boss outside of his Charge Up effect is recommended. The boss rotates through the warrior stances, changing his abilities with each one. Battle stance is particularly tank damage orientated with Mortal Strike. Berserker stance has both Cleave and Whirlwind, which can wipe down a group very quickly, and defensive stance isn't threatening at all. The boss's adds are actually the biggest annoyance in this fight and should aim to be killed as quick as possible. Moving with Arc Weld is a surefire way to get yourself killed, so if you notice it's on you, stand still. The achievement is to kill the general whilst under the effects of Charge Up. This adds some degree of danger to the fight. The boss and his adds all do an additional 30% damage. This does stack with the boss's auras, so during Berserker stance, the boss and his adds will share a 55% damage increase, which is very noticeable. All this does really is means that in each stance you need to deal with the mechanics properly. So in battle stance, you're going to have some intense tank healing to take care of. In Berserker stance, spread out and avoid those whirlwinds. And in defensive stance, just don't die to spell reflex and kill the adds very, very quickly. Volcan is the next boss, which has got Temper, which strikes his anvil and summons molten golems. He's got Heat, which heals a molten golem for 20% health. Shattering Stomp, where at 25% health he'll stomp, shattering all brittle golems and dealing physical damage to the group. And then when it comes to the molten golems, they've got an Immolation Strike, which is dispellable by the way, where the golem burns a player, inflicting fire damage and applying a fire dot. Cooldown, where the golem loses 1% of their max health every second, and as they lose health they also lose movement speed. Shatter, so when a golem reaches 1% health it becomes cooled. These are turned into brittle golems, which are shattered during Shattering Stomp. Tactics wise, this fight isn't particularly complicated at all, although it may seem it when you first encounter it. The adds are more of an annoyance than anything else. They seem to regularly drop threat and will hit random people. The only wipe mechanic on this boss is Shattering Stomp. The stomp itself does minimal damage, however each golem will shatter, dealing heavy damage to nearby players. There's 2 tactics that seem to be used here. One is to kill the adds and cleave the boss in one location. Around the 30 to 40% mark, move the boss as far away from the cooled adds as possible, finishing DPSing him to the 25% mark. He'll no longer be in range to shatter the golems. Damage is minimal, however this requires DPS to stop entirely for a short period of time whilst the tank repositions. You may still get 1 or 2 golems in the process, but that's manageable. Option number 2 tactics wise is just murder the boss. It seems just ignoring the adds entirely and full DPS in the boss, possibly with Bloodlust, is enough to get the boss to that 25% mark quick enough that not enough golems have cooled to the brittle state yet, and therefore the shatter does no damage. Achievement wise, it's to kill Volcan without allowing him to shatter more than 4 brittle golems. Both tactics already discussed are viable tactics to get the achievement. Very quickly into phase 1, the group DPS will be high enough to just nuke the boss with pure single target in order to not cleave the adds, and once the boss hits 25%, you're safe as he does not shatter again. The next boss you'll encounter is Ionar. which has got Static Overload, which charges a random player inflicting nature damage over 10 seconds and periodically zaps nearby players. After 10 seconds, causes additional nature damage and a knockback to all players in 8 yards. It has a Ball Lightning, where it throws a ball of lightning at a random player dealing nature damage, and it disperses at 75, 50, and 25% health. He becomes completely invulnerable and summoning Sparks of Ironer. Sparks of Ironer deal damage to the closest player within 5 yards. Each hit applies a 2% increased nature damage taken debuff that stacks. Tactics-wise, just DPS the boss while spreading out to avoid damage from Static Overload. Have the tank bring the boss to the back of the room he starts in, and when the boss gets to 75, 50, or 25% health, it will go invulnerable, and I suggest just running down the stairs. This is so you avoid the ads. Standing in the ads for any length of time is likely to get you killed, and you'll see people do it. Loken is the final boss, which has got Pulsing Shockwave, which pulses AoE nature damage, dealing increased nature damage the further the targets are from the boss. All party members affected by this will also take 25% increased nature damage. Lightning Nova is an AoE casted nature damage, which deals massive damage to all players within 20 yards. And Arc Lightning, which is similar to Chain Lightning, where when a player's hit, it will jump to nearby players, inflicting nature damage. The tactics are fairly simple. Pulsing Shockwave will do minimal damage if under the 20 yards marker. You want to stay relatively spread to avoid Arc Lightnings from hitting the party. When the boss starts casting Lightning Nova, you want to get to the 25 to 30 yard range. Don't go too much further though, otherwise the Pulsing Shockwave will start hitting very hard as well. Move back into the original positions once the boss has cast. For the achievement, you just got to kill Loken in under 2 minutes. The original intent of this achievement was probably to force players to stay in during the Lightning Nova in an effort to keep DPS in. The achievement is likely something you'll passively get, as with cooldowns used, it's very likely to die under 2 minutes in normal or heroic gear. This is only made easier with raid gear, and potentially one of the easiest achievements you're going to get in any heroic dungeon. And that's it. If you enjoyed the video, check all the other ones out. Be sure to like and subscribe, and roll the outro. There's lots of ways you can support the channel to keep me here putting out World of Warcraft content and covering all future MMOs. Consider joining the channel as a member. You get access to emotes. Everyone will know you're a member when you comment on future videos because you get a nice icon next to your name. And you get access to members-only videos, which I'll be putting a lot of on the channel throughout the year. Additionally, there's a Patreon link in the description as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.